so happy we alive.
And that's just with the small legal heroin program that's very tightly controlled. So if you took the, as I suggested, treatment on request, methadone maintenance, and a small heroin program for the most difficult cases, you are undermining the drug market so effectively. So effectively.
You know, one thing is, backing up just a little bit, it seems like the social context in which the war on drugs thrives is to some extent built on a massive, gigantic, huge process of public disinformation that amounts to billions of dollars that have been spent to get the American public to think about these issues in certain stereotyped ways.
No question about it.
For instance, and some of these issues are covered in Dr. John Morgan's book, Marijuana Facts. But one would be that drug use, or let's say marijuana use, equals
abuse.
Drug abuse.
Yes, that's right.
When
in fact the opposite is the more true. Among every drug, including crack and heroin, pick two more dangerous ones. If you look at the surveys done in the United States by the U.S. government of drug use, what you find is the vast majority of users of every drug use occasionally. They're not addicts, they're not daily users, they use once a month, a couple times a year, they're not hardcore users. And so the fact is, the vast majority of users can use these drugs responsibly. And because we've faced to face that reality, we have designed a drug war that assumes everybody's an abuser. And because we have that false premise, the policies don't fit, they don't work.
And furthermore, carrying some of these forces having to do with what the citizen psyche, if you will, thinks of in terms of what's patriotic, what's good citizenship,
what's moral,
what is moral, getting right down to it. And the whole religious block, if you will, is basically, or has been, right hand in hand with the drug warriors. And part of the thinking that this is based on is that it's not a matter so much of what someone is like in their heart, how they treat their fellow man, whether you're honest and straightforward in how you live your life. The only thing that counts, according to this paradigm, if you will, is the only thing that counts is whether somebody is a drug user or not. It's not a matter whether they cheat on their wife or steal or
pay their mortgage
or anything. It's just all you do is identify yourself. I don't do it, And do you have any comment on?
No question. Drug users have been very effectively stigmatized by our approach to drugs, and the result of that stigmatization is to make things worse. It increases the chance of negative consequences. It means that, for example, a heroin user is going to be using in a shooting gallery rather than the clinic. It means that a marijuana user is going to be likely to be hiding from parents and authorities, and therefore smoking in a car, increasing the risk of a negative result. So the stigmatization of drug users actually makes things worse and makes the problems worse. And that's why after the last decade, we have spent, as a federal government only, about $200 billion on the drug war. $200 billion with a B. And if you add the state and local governments, it's about equal to that. So you're talking approaching $500 billion on the drug war in the last decade. And the result, we have the record high overdose deaths last year. We had near record high emergency room admissions. The year before was the record. Near record high emergency room admissions of drugs at the hospitals. Half of new AIDS cases coming from IV drug use. 90% of pediatric AIDS cases coming from IV drug use. 65% of women with AIDS coming from having sex with an IV drug user or using IV drugs themselves. Adolescent drug use increasing by 50% while we're spending nearly $500 billion. And this is happening, all these failures are happening at a time when we're having record arrests, record incarceration, and record seizures. In other words, the drug war is meeting all its goals. They're arresting people, putting them in jail, and taking their drugs in record numbers. And yet, in record numbers, we're seeing more damage to society and to the individuals involved. And so, if that's not as clear as it can be, that no amount of money, no amount of force is going to win, because we're spending as much as we can, and we're arresting as much as we can, and it's still making the problem worse. And so it's obvious, it's kind of like bloodletting used to be, you know, you're a doctor, as a therapeutic approach. You know, the idea of taking blood out of people to cleanse them actually killed patients. But it took years to figure that out. And we're in that kind of situation, I think, with the drug war. We're bloodletting the culture, we're bloodletting the society, and it's killing us. It's the round peg in the square hole being slammed and slammed and slammed, not only destroying the peg, not only destroying the hole, destroying the whole game board. And now we're going into this Colombian drug war, which is a morass like Vietnam. We're getting into a civil war that's 4 decades old. We don't have any clear objectives. We don't have any goals. We have no exit strategy. Where's it going to lead to? No one's even asking that question as we quickly move. Right now in Washington, D.C., we're quickly moving toward big funding, $1 billion in funding this year for the Colombian drug war.
And so, you know, just hearing you put it all together like that reminds me in the back of my mind of the book I once read. I think it was called March of Folly.
Oh yeah,
and part
history of wars.
And, yeah, it's like there's, I mean, everything's logical, and someone like yourself has the insight to elucidate the insanity and the ridiculousness of so many policies and so forth. And yet, in spite of that, the folly continues, and myself as an outsider in a sense to the inner workings of the movement, can't help but wonder, with $200 billion going in to keeping things the same or continuing the disinformation, with the pharmaceutical industry, for example, contributing substantially to both parties. They have a very definite stake in this matter, although as a physician I don't think that modern medicine is threatened whatsoever.
No.
In terms of the great strides and progress that we're making in all kinds of areas of medicine, but nonetheless, it is possible that if marijuana, for example, were to be recognized as being therapeutic, as it has been for centuries among other cultures, it's possible that there might be a decrease of retail on certain antidepressants, possibly certain tranquilizers, which people might fear might hurt the bottom line. But anyway, you have the pharmaceutical industry.
We're up against a lot of big players.
The recreational, legal drug industry, namely the alcohol.
The prison industrial complex.
The alcohol. Now, when we're talking about millions and millions of dollars that are going into the key players who actually run the show in our system, and then going on the criminal industrial complex. What would happen if all these people that are incarcerated for marijuana, for example, with nonviolent crimes, were let out of jail?
There's no question. We're up against a very entrenched bureaucracy, very entrenched corporations that are profiting from the current system, and then, of course, we're up against the cartels, the illegal corporations that are profiting from this situation too. And so it's a very difficult battle. But you have to, if you look back in the history of the United States, there's been similar challenges for progress in the past. Whether it's ending, slavery, whether it's women's right to vote, racial discrimination, gay rights, a whole range of social issues.